First contact gone wrong, the stars had never seemed so cold to Commander Jackson Reed as he stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiant. 50 years had passed since humanity first ventured beyond their solar system, discovering they were far from alone in the universe. The galaxy teemed with life, some humanoid, others utterly alien, but all shared one common trait. They were old. Ancient civilizations that had been traversing the stars while humans still painted on cave walls. Status report, Reed commanded, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing hundreds of Earth vessels assembling in formation. Ships of all sizes, from sleek corvettes to massive dreadnoughts, gathered like a storm cloud on the edge of the Sol system. All vessels reporting ready, sir, his executive officer replied. The fleet is assembled. We await your command. Reed nodded, the weight of what they were about to do settling heavily on his shoulders. Humanity had always been considered the galaxy's newest child, naive, impulsive, and primitive by the standards of the elder races. The Galactic Concord had reluctantly granted them observer status, allowing limited trade and cultural exchange, but denying them any real voice in galactic politics. Earth had been patient, focusing on building their strength while learning the ways of interstellar diplomacy. But patience had its limits. Begin the briefing, Reed ordered, turning to face the gathered officers in the war room. The lights dim as a holographic projection materialized in the center of the table, displaying the insignia of the Varidian Empire. A predatory avian clutching a trio of stars in its talons. 3 months ago, Reed began, his voice steady despite the rage that still burned inside him. Ambassador Elara Chen was sent to the Varidian homeworld to negotiate improved trade relations. As a gesture of goodwill, she brought her family, including her 8-year-old daughter, Mai. The hologram shifted to show footage of the diplomatic delegation. Elara Chen standing proud in her formal attire, her husband beside her, and little Mai, with curious eyes and a bright smile, waving at the alien dignitaries. The negotiations proceeded normally until the third day when Mai wandered away from the designated human quarters, fascinated by the alien architecture. Reed's jaw tightened. She was discovered by High Commander Zorax, the Varidian security chief. The room grew deathly quiet as the next images appeared, security footage showing the tall, avian Varidian confronting the small human child. What happened next had been broadcast across every screen on Earth. High Commander Zorax, irritated by what he perceived as a security breach, struck the child. For a Varidian, it might have been a minor disciplinary action. For a human child, the blow was devastating. May's small body crumpled to the ground, her spine shattered by the alien's strength. She died in her mother's arms 20 minutes later. Reed continued, his voice now a controlled whisper. The Varidians offered what they considered appropriate compensation, trade concessions, and mining rights. When Ambassador Chen demanded justice, the Varidian Emperor himself dismissed the incident as regrettable but inconsequential, given the child's species. A murmur of anger rippled through the officers. Reed raised a hand for silence. What happened next shocked even the oldest galactic civilizations. Ambassador Chen, a diplomat known for her patience and restraint, attacked the Emperor with her bare hands. A grim smile touched Reed's lips. She broke his jaw before security restrained her. The footage showed Elara Chen, her face contorted with grief and rage, lunging at the towering Varidian Emperor. For a brief moment, even the alien monarch knew fear. The Galactic Concord ruled against us, Reed continued. The death was deemed an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding. The Varidians were ordered to provide minimal reparations. Ambassador Chen was stripped of her position and returned to Earth. Reed paused, letting the injustice of it sink in. And then Earth went silent. For 3 months, humanity had withdrawn from all galactic communications. Trading posts were abandoned, diplomatic missions recalled. The elder races assumed humans were sulking, retreating to lick their wounds like the primitive species they were thought to be. They couldn't have been more wrong. Project Nemesis is now active, Reed announced, switching to a detailed strategic display of Varidian space. For 50 years, we've been dismissed as newcomers, underestimated, and overlooked. Today, the galaxy will learn that humanity is not to be trifled with. The hologram expanded to show Earth's full military capacity, a force far greater than anything they had ever revealed to the galactic community. While presenting themselves as a nascent spacefaring civilization, humans have been building, planning, and preparing. We've studied every Varidian weakness, mapped every supply line, identified every strategic asset, said Admiral Helena Voss, rising from her seat. The fleet's tactical commander pointed to key locations across the Varidian Empire. Their defense grid relies on predictable algorithms we can exploit. Their ships are powerful but sluggish. Most importantly, they've grown complacent after millennia of unchallenged dominance. What about the Galactic Concord? Asked a young officer. Won't they intervene? Reed exchanged a glance with Admiral Voss before answering. The Concord has already made their position clear. They value stability over justice. We expect them to issue strongly worded condemnations while doing absolutely nothing. By the time they decide to act, it will be too late. Our objective is not conquest, Admiral Voss emphasized, highlighting the Varidian capital. We seek justice for Mei Chen, and to establish once and for all that humans and human children are not expendable. We will strike hard and fast, crippling their military and governmental infrastructure. Reed raised his hand, silencing the room once more. There is one non-negotiable order that every soldier, pilot, and officer must understand. No harm comes to Varidian civilians, especially children. We are not them. We will be better than them. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The response was unanimous. Reed nodded, satisfied. We launch in 6 hours. Dismissed. As the officers filed out, Admiral Voss lingered behind. Do you think they'll surrender once they realize what they're facing? Reed's expression darkened. The Varidians don't believe in surrender. Their entire culture revolves around dominance. They'll fight to the last. Then this will be bloody. Yes, Reed agreed, but necessary. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity's patience is not weakness, and our compassion is not naivety. He looked once more at the image of Mei Chen, forever frozen in time, and that our children are not casualties to be dismissed with a wave of a clawed hand. The Varidian Defense Minister Krell stalked through the gleaming halls of the Imperial Palace, his talons clicking against the polished stone. After 50 cycles serving the Empire, he had grown accustomed to being feared. Lesser species scrambled out of his path, their eyes downcast in deference to his rank. Today, however, his mind was troubled by the sudden silence from the humans. The incident with the child had been unfortunate, but hardly worth disrupting valuable trade agreements. The humans' emotional reaction was precisely why the Galactic Concord had been right to limit their influence. Such primitive passions had no place in civilized interstellar relations. Minister Krull, a breathless aide, intercepted him, the young Varidian's feathers ruffled in obvious distress. We've detected multiple anomalies at the edge of Imperial space. Krull clicked his beak impatiently. Be specific. Our long-range sensors show gravitational distortions consistent with large numbers of ships dropping out of FTL, but we're unable to get clear readings. Something is interfering with our scanners. For the first time in many cycles, Krull felt a flutter of unease in his chest. Location. Simultaneously at 7 different border outposts, Minister. Impossible. No species possessed a fleet that could mount a coordinated attack across such distances. The logistics alone would be. The palace trembled, lights flickered. The distant sound of explosions penetrated even the thick walls of the ancient structure. We're under attack, the aide shrieked, all protocol forgotten. The orbital defense stations are reporting multiple hostile contacts. Krull rushed to the nearest communication terminal, keying in his emergency access code. The display showed chaos, Varidian warships, the pride of the Imperial fleet, being systematically disabled by smaller, faster vessels that seemed to anticipate their every move. Identify the attackers, he demanded. The response came a moment later, disbelief evident in the officer's voice. They're human vessels, Minister. Hundreds of them. They're targeting our command centers with surgical precision. Impossible, Krull hissed. The humans possess no such military capacity. Their ships are primitive, their weapons inferior. The evidence suggests otherwise, Minister, the officer replied, his image distorting as another explosion rocked the communications network. They've already disabled our primary defense grid. There. The transmission cut off abruptly. Krull stood frozen, his mind struggling to process this development. The humans were a minor species, barely a century into space travel. How could they possibly mount an offensive against the Varidian Empire, which had stood for 10,000 years? The Emperor's private channel activated. Minister Krull explained this attack immediately. The Emperor's voice carried both fury and something Krull had never heard before, fear. The humans appear to be retaliating for the child incident, Your Eminence. Over a single worthless offspring. The Emperor's crest rose in incredulity. Mobilize the home fleet. Crush these primitives and remind them of their place. At once, Your Eminence. But as Krull issued the orders, he couldn't shake the growing sense that the Varidian Empire had made a terrible miscalculation. They had judged humanity by their apparent technological development, their brief history among the stars, their emotional responses that seemed so primitive to Varidian sensibilities. They had dismissed them as harmless. As the palace shook again and emergency alarms blared throughout the capital, Krull realized they might have awakened something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. On Earth, in a modest apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Elara Chen sat alone, watching the first reports of the offensive. Her diplomatic career was over, her family shattered, her daughter gone. For 3 months, she had existed in a fog of grief and rage, unable to find purpose or meaning. Until today. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal General Maya Santos, the architect of Project Nemesis. "It's begun," Santos said simply, crossing the room to stand beside her old friend. Elara nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical displays showing the first wave of Earth's assault on the Varidian Empire. "Will it bring her back?" "No," Santos answered honestly. "Nothing can do that." "Will it prevent this from happening to another child? Another family?" "Yes," Santos said with absolute conviction. "After today, no species in the galaxy will ever again dismiss a human life as inconsequential." Elara closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Then it's worth it." On the screen, Earth's fleet advanced inexorably toward the heart of the Varidian Empire, bringing with them humanity's message to the stars. "We were patient until you gave us reason not to be. We were peaceful until you gave us cause for war. We forgave until you took someone unforgivable. Now you will learn what humanity is truly capable of." Operation Nemesis. The Varidian response was exactly as Commander Reed had predicted, overwhelming force deployed with absolute confidence. Their massive battleships, some over 5 kilometers in length, moved to engage the human fleet with the casual arrogance of predators who had never known defeat. "They're deploying in standard Varidian combat formation," reported Lieutenant Quan from her tactical station aboard the UES Defiant. "Three-tiered defensive shell, heavy weapons platforms at the core." Reed nodded, studying the holographic battle display. The Varidian formation was textbook perfect and utterly predictable. For 50 years, humanity had studied every scrap of information about Varidian military doctrine, analyzing thousands of historical engagements. What they discovered was revealing. The Empire hadn't meaningfully evolved its tactics in centuries. "They're hailing us, sir," Lieutenant Quan announced. On screen, Reed ordered. The aristocratic features of Admiral Zex appeared, his feathered crest fully extended in a display of dominance. "Human vessels, this is Admiral Zex of the Imperial Varidian Navy. Your unprovoked attack on Imperial territory constitutes an act of war. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded or face immediate destruction." Reed's expression remained neutral. "This is Commander Jackson Reed of Earth Fleet. Our attack was not unprovoked, Admiral. We are here for justice for Mai Chen." The Varidian's eyes narrowed. "You risk your entire species over a single worthless child. This confirms everything we believed about human irrationality." "That's where you're wrong, Admiral," Reed replied calmly. "If we were truly irrational, we wouldn't have spent 3 months preparing this operation. We wouldn't have analyzed every weakness in your defenses, every flaw in your tactical doctrine. We wouldn't have developed countermeasures for your weapon systems." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the Varidian's features. "You misjudged us," Reed continued. "You saw our emotional response as weakness. You never considered it might be the source of our strength." He leaned forward. "You killed a child. Now you face the consequences." Reed cut the transmission with a gesture. "All ships, execute Operation Nemesis." The human fleet suddenly dispersed, breaking formation in what appeared to be chaotic disarray. The Varidians, expecting a conventional engagement, hesitated momentarily, exactly as planned. "Epsilon Squadron, you have weapons free," Reed commanded. Across the battlefield, specialized electronic warfare vessels activated their systems. The Varidian communication network, secure for millennia, suddenly filled with contradictory orders, false sensor readings, and emergency alerts. Their rigid command structure, entirely dependent on centralized control, began to fragment. Theta and Omega squadrons deployed drones. Thousands of autonomous combat drones launched from human carriers, each one a fraction of the size of a conventional fighter, but equipped with advanced neural networks that allowed them to learn and adapt in real time. They swarmed toward the confused Varidian formations, targeting communication arrays, sensor nodes, and weapon systems with surgical precision. The massive Varidian ships, designed to exchange devastating broadsides with enemies of similar size, found themselves unable to track the small, agile targets. Their point defense systems, calibrated for conventional threats, struggled to adapt to the swarming tactics. "They're trying to regroup," Lieutenant Quan noted. "Establishing backup communication protocols." Reed nodded. "Right on schedule. Admiral Voss, you may proceed with Phase 2. Aboard the UVS Retribution, Admiral Helena Voss watched the battle unfold with clinical detachment. While Commander Reed's forces occupied the Varidian fleet, her strike group had maneuvered into position behind the enemy's defensive line. "All ships prepare for synchronized strike," she ordered. "Target weapons and propulsion systems only. Remember, we disable, not destroy." The human vessels opened fire simultaneously. Unlike the brute force approach of Varidian weapons, human artillery had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Imperial ship design. Precision-guided munitions slipped through shield harmonics, targeting the poorly protected junctions between the massive armor plates that Varidians relied upon. Ship after ship went dark, their systems overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. The few Varidian commanders who managed to break free from the electronic warfare fog found themselves isolated and surrounded. Admiral Zex watched in mounting horror as his supposedly invincible fleet was systematically dismantled by an enemy he had dismissed as primitive. "Impossible," he whispered. "They're barbarians, newcomers." His flagship rocked violently as precision strikes disabled its main engines. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in an ominous red glow. "Admiral," his second-in-command reported, voice quavering, "80% of the fleet has been neutralized. We're receiving no response from Imperial Command." Zex stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans weren't even attempting to destroy his vessels. They were methodically disabling them, leaving crews alive but helpless. This wasn't warfare as he understood it. This was humiliation. "The human flagship is hailing us again," his communication officer announced. Reed's face appeared on the screen, calm and resolute. "Admiral Zex, your fleet is neutralized. To prevent further loss of life, I suggest you surrender." Surrender. The word itself was anathema to Varidian military doctrine. "We do not surrender to lesser species," Zex snarled. Reed sighed. "I thought you might say that." "Very well." He turned to someone off-screen. "Proceed with the broadcast." Before Zex could respond, every communication system on his flagship, and indeed throughout Varidian space, was overridden. The face of Elara Chen filled the screens, her eyes hard with grief and determination. "I am Ambassador Elara Chen of Earth," she began, her voice steady. 3 months ago, my daughter Mai was killed by High Commander Zorax for the crime of wandering into the wrong corridor. When I demanded justice, the Emperor himself deemed her life inconsequential. Today, humanity delivers its response. The broadcast switched to live footage of the disabled Varidian fleet, interspersed with images of the ongoing precision strikes against military installations across Varidian space. "We do not target civilians," Elara continued. "We do not harm children. Every strike has been calculated to minimize casualties while maximizing strategic impact. This is not revenge, it is justice, delivered with restraint that your empire could not comprehend." Zex watched, paralyzed by the unprecedented situation. No species had ever penetrated Varidian defenses so thoroughly. No enemy had ever dictated terms to the Empire. "We demand the following," Elara stated. "High Commander Zorax will be surrendered to human custody to face trial for the murder of Mai Chen. The Varidian Empire will acknowledge its crime and make reparations as determined by mutual arbitration. And finally, the Empire will recognize the full sovereign rights of humanity in the galactic community." Her expression hardened. "You have 6 hours to comply. If these terms are rejected, we will proceed to Phase 3 of our operation. I don't think you want to see what that entails." The broadcast ended, leaving Zex staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his long military career, he felt true fear, not for himself, but for the Empire he had served his entire life. On the Varidian homeworld, Emperor Kalzax raged through the Imperial Palace, his personal guards struggling to keep pace. "Unacceptable," he shrieked, his crest fully extended in fury. "How dare these primitive apes dictate terms to the Eternal Empire?" His advisors exchanged nervous glances. None wanted to be the one to speak the truth, that the supposedly primitive humans had just systematically dismantled the most powerful fleet in the sector. Minister Krell finally stepped forward. "Your Eminence, we must consider our position carefully. The humans have demonstrated capabilities far beyond our intelligence assessments. They've disabled our orbital defenses and our communications network. Most concerning, they've shown remarkable restraint." "Restraint?" the Emperor hissed. "You call this restraint?" "Yes, sire," Krall continued, his voice steady despite his fear. "They could have destroyed our ships rather than disabling them. They could have bombarded our cities rather than targeting military installations. The fact that they haven't done so suggests they genuinely seek resolution rather than conquest." The Emperor's personal communicator chimed, one of the few systems still functioning. "What is it?" he snapped. "Your Eminence," came the urgent voice of his intelligence director, "we're receiving reports from across the Empire. Subject species are rising up inspired by the human attack. They've seized control of 3 mining colonies and a shipyard already." The Emperor froze. For 10,000 years, the Varidian Empire had ruled through a combination of military might and carefully cultivated fear. If the subject species believed the Empire was vulnerable. "There's more," the intelligence director continued. "We've intercepted communications from the Galactic Concord. They're convening an emergency session, but initial statements suggest they will not intervene on our behalf. Several member species are expressing support for the human position." The implications were clear. The humans hadn't just launched a military strike, they had shattered the foundation of Varidian power in a single calculated move. Minister Kroll watched understanding dawn on his Emperor's face. "Sire, I recommend we accept the human terms. High Commander Zorax acted without authorization in killing the child." Surrendering him would be a small price to pay for. Surrender a high-ranking imperial official to a lesser species? The Emperor snarled. Never. The Empire does not bow to anyone. Then perhaps came a new voice: the Empire should fall. All heads turned to see High Commander Zorax himself enter the chamber, his uniform impeccable despite the chaos engulfing the capital. What treachery is this? The Emperor demanded. Zorax approached slowly, his posture unnaturally calm. No treachery, Your Eminence, merely pragmatism. He turned to address the assembled advisors. The humans have outmaneuvered us completely. Our military lies in ruins. Our subject species are in revolt. Our allies have abandoned us. Because of your actions, Minister Krell pointed out, you killed a child. Zorax shrugged, a disturbingly human gesture. A mistake, I admit. I underestimated their attachment to their young. A cultural misunderstanding that has proved costly. He turned back to the Emperor. But we can still salvage the situation. How? The Emperor demanded. By giving them what they want. Zorax straightened his uniform. I will surrender myself to human custody. The Empire will make the required acknowledgments and reparations. In return, we demand that the humans withdraw their forces and cease their support of rebellions within our territory. The chamber fell silent. The concept of negotiation rather than domination was alien to Varidian culture. Yet the alternatives seemed increasingly grim. And if we refuse? The Emperor asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Zorax gestured toward a viewpoint overlooking the capital city. Then I suspect we will discover exactly what Phase 3 of the human operation entails. Based on their performance thus far, I doubt we would survive to regret our decision. In orbit above Earth, the massive space station Harmony served as the headquarters of the United Terran Defense Force. Within its secure conference room, the highest-ranking military and civilian leaders monitored the progress of Operation Nemesis in real time. General Maya Santos stood before the assembled leaders, her expression grave. Phase 1 and 2 have been completed with minimal casualties. The Varidian military has been effectively neutralized and their command structure is in disarray. We expect their response to our terms within the next hour. President Elena Morales nodded. And if they refuse? Let me proceed to Phase 3, Santos replied. Targeted strikes against governmental infrastructure, followed by support for independence movements among their subject species. Within days, the Varidian Empire would cease to exist as a unified political entity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had the power to dismantle one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. That's not justice, said a quiet voice from the doorway. That's vengeance. All heads turned to see Elara Chen, still wearing civilian clothes, enter the conference room. Ambassador Chen, President Morales acknowledged with a respectful nod. Your broadcast was very effective. Because it was honest, Elara replied, taking a seat at the table. We sought justice, not conquest. We demonstrated restraint, not barbarity. She looked around at the assembled leaders. If we proceed to Phase 3, we become what we despise. Defense Minister Jackson frowned. The Varidians killed your daughter, Ambassador. They dismissed her life as worthless. Why would you advocate mercy? Not mercy, Elara corrected him. Justice. Proportional, restrained justice. She leaned forward. My daughter was killed because one culture failed to recognize the humanity of another. If we destroy their civilization in response, we commit the same fundamental error. The debate might have continued, but it was interrupted by an incoming transmission from the front lines. Commander Reed's face appeared on the main screen, his expression carefully neutral. Madam President, we've received the Varidian response to our terms. And President Morales prompted. They've accepted all conditions. High Commander Zorax has surrendered himself to our custody. The Emperor has issued a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing and agreed to arbitration regarding reparations. A murmur ran through the conference room, relief mingled with surprise. There's more, Reed continued. The Galactic Concord has requested an emergency session to discuss humanity's status within the interstellar community. Several influential species have indicated they will support our bid for full membership and voting rights. President Morales turned to Elara. It seems your approach has been vindicated, Ambassador. Elara nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Mag would have wanted this. Not revenge, but change. Not destruction, but understanding. As the meeting adjourned, General Santos remained behind with Elara. Are you certain about this? Zorax will stand trial, but the Empire remains intact. Changed, though, Elara replied. Forever changed. They've learned that humanity cannot be dismissed or exploited without consequences. She smiled sadly. And perhaps we've learned something, too, that our greatest strength isn't our technology or our military, but our capacity for both righteous anger and measured restraint. Santos squeezed her friend's shoulder. Your daughter would be proud. Yes, Elara whispered, looking out at the stars. I believe she would. Across the galaxy, species that had long suffered under Varidian dominance watched in awe as the mighty empire bent to human demands. Their lesson was clear. The newcomers to the galactic stage were not to be underestimated. Humanity had arrived, and the old order would never be the same again. The new galactic order. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord buzzed with tension. Representatives from over 300 species filled the tiered seating, their conversations creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and guttural sounds that the translation systems struggled to process. At the center of the hall stood a single podium, currently unoccupied but soon to become the focus of every eye, antenna, and sensory organ in the vast chamber. In a preparation room adjacent to the hall, Elara Chen adjusted her formal diplomatic attire. 6 months had passed since Operation Nemesis, 6 months of intense negotiation, political maneuvering, and careful bridge building. Today would mark humanity's formal acceptance as full members of the Galactic Concord, a process that normally took centuries, expedited by humanity's unprecedented demonstration of both power and restraint. "Are you ready?" President Morales asked, herself dressed in the ceremonial garb of Earth's highest office. Elara nodded, though her hands betrayed her nervousness as they smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her jacket. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You don't have to do this," Morales reminded her. "Any of our diplomats could present the ratification." "No," Elara said firmly, "it needs to be me. For my." The doors slid open, and a tall, multi-limbed Solarian, one of the Concord's elder races, entered. "It is time," the being announced, his translator rendering the clicking speech into melodious English. Elara took a deep breath and followed the Solarian into the Grand Assembly Hall. The cacophony immediately died down as she walked toward the central podium, accompanied by President Morales and a small delegation of Earth's highest officials. From his position in the Varidian section, Minister Krull watched the human delegation with thoughtful eyes. The past 6 months had transformed his understanding of the newcomers to galactic society. What he had once dismissed as primitive emotional responses, he now recognized as a different form of strength, one his own species had perhaps lost during their millennia of unchallenged dominance. The Emperor had sent him to represent the Empire at this historic session, a tacit acknowledgement that Krull's counsel to accept the human terms had been wise. The Empire had survived, though fundamentally changed. The subject species had been granted increased autonomy, their grievances addressed through newly established arbitration processes. Imperial military doctrine was being painfully re-examined and restructured, and High Commander Zorax had faced justice. The trial had been broadcast throughout the galaxy, Zorax standing tall and unrepentant, facing Elara Chen across the courtroom. The evidence presented methodically, the security footage, the medical reports, the testimony of witnesses, the defense arguments, cultural difference, lack of malicious intent, a moment of frustrated impulse rather than premeditated violence. The verdict: guilty of negligent homicide. The sentence: 20 Earth years of service in humanitarian outposts across former Imperial territory, helping the very species he had once considered beneath notice. Krull hadn't expected the sentence. Varidian justice would have demanded execution for such a crime if, indeed, harming a lesser species would have been considered a crime at all under Imperial law. But human justice, it seemed, sought rehabilitation rather than mere punishment. His thoughts were interrupted as Elara Chen reached the podium. The entire hall fell silent. "Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Concord," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion Krull could see in her eyes. "I stand before you today representing not only humanity but a principle that transcends species, empire, or individual, the principle that every sentient life has inherent value, regardless of age, origin, or development." She paused, allowing the translation systems to catch up. 6 months ago, my daughter Mai was killed because one civilization failed to recognize the humanity, the personhood, of another. The response of my species was both a demonstration of our resolve and our restraint. We showed that we could not be dismissed, but also that we would not abandon our principles even in pursuit of justice. Across the hall, representatives of dozens of species leaned forward, some using technology to record her words, others simply captivated by the raw emotion evident in her delivery. Today, as humanity accepts full membership in this ancient and honored body, we bring with us not only our technology, our art, our perspective, but also our conviction that the strong have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable, that advanced civilizations must be measured not by their power but by their compassion, and that true justice requires both strength and mercy. In the Earth delegation, General Santos watched with pride as her friend transformed personal tragedy into galactic change. The military operation had opened the door, but it was Elara's unwavering moral clarity that was reshaping interstellar relations. The ratification I present today, Elara continued, includes humanity's acceptance of all Concord regulations and responsibilities, but it also includes our proposal for a new interspecies covenant, what we are calling the Mai Chen protocols. A murmur rippled through the assembly. This had been rumored but not confirmed until this moment. These protocols establish three fundamental principles, Elara explained. First, that the harming of any sentient being, regardless of species, age, or development, is recognized as a crime under Concord law. Second, that cultural differences may explain actions but do not excuse them when harm results. And third, that all member species commit to educational and diplomatic programs designed to prevent such tragedies before they occur. She looked around the vast chamber, meeting the gaze of representatives from civilizations older than human recorded history. We are not so naive as to believe that these protocols will immediately transform relations between all species. Ancient prejudices and cultural misunderstandings cannot be erased by legislation alone, but they establish a standard, commitment that we can all strive toward for the betterment of this diverse galactic community we share. From the Varidian section, Minister Krail found himself nodding slightly. The humans continued to surprise him. Where he had expected vengeance, they offered vision. The Concord Arbiter, a member of one of the galaxy's oldest species, approached a central platform. The Concord has reviewed the proposed Mai Chen protocols. The ancient being announced, its voice translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. We find them to be in accordance with the fundamental principles that have guided this body since its inception, even if we have sometimes fallen short of those ideals in practice. The Arbiter turned to face the assembly. I call for a vote on both the ratification of humanity's full membership and the adoption of the Mai Chen protocols. Representatives, indicate your position. Across the hall, thousands of voting systems activated. On the central display, numbers began to tabulate in real time. In the Earth delegation, President Morales leaned toward General Santos. "Will it pass?" she whispered. Santos nodded slightly. "Our intelligence indicates overwhelming support. The elder races were impressed by our restraint during Operation Nemesis. The younger species see us as champions against the old hierarchies. And the empires," she glanced toward the Varidian section. "They respect strength, if nothing else." As the final votes were tallied, the result appeared on the main display, 96% in favor. The Arbiter raised all four of its limbs in the traditional gesture of Concord consensus. The vote is decided. Humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Concord, with all rights and responsibilities therein. The Mai Chen protocols are adopted as binding Concord law, effective immediately. A cheer erupted from many sections of the hall, particularly from the younger species who had long chafed under the tiered structure of galactic society. Even some elder races joined in the approval, recognizing that the Concord had grown stagnant and that humanity's entry might revitalize an institution that had become increasingly ceremonial and ineffective. Elara Chen stood at the podium, overwhelmed by the moment. This would not bring Mai back, nothing could do that. But perhaps her daughter's death had not been entirely in vain. Perhaps it had been the catalyst for a more just galactic order. As the formal ceremony concluded, representatives from dozens of species approached the human delegation, some offering congratulations, others seeking private discussions about potential alliances or trade agreements. Humanity had become, almost overnight, a major power in galactic politics. Minister Krail waited for a lull in the procession before approaching Elara. The security detail tensed visibly, but Elara gestured for them to stand down. "Ambassador Chen," Krail said formally, inclining his head in a gesture that would have been unthinkable for a Varidian diplomat only months earlier. "The Empire extends its congratulations on your admission to the Concord." "Thank you, Minister," Elara replied with equal formality. An awkward silence fell between them, representatives of species that had so recently been in open conflict. "I wish to convey something," Krail said finally, his translator struggling to capture the nuances of his tone. "The Empire has existed for 10,000 years. In that time, we have conquered, ruled, and dominated. We believe this was the natural order, the strong commanding the weak." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "What your species showed us was not just that you are strong, though indeed you prove that beyond doubt, but that there are different forms of strength. The restraint you demonstrated, this was not a concept we valued." Elara studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And now we learn," Krail admitted, "painfully, slowly, against our cultural instincts, but we learn. The reforms implemented in the Empire since your operation, they face resistance, certainly. 10,000 years of thinking cannot be changed in 6 months, but they progress." He reached into his ceremonial robes and withdrew a small crystalline object. "This is for you." A token of, not apology, for no token could suffice for such a loss, but of acknowledgement. Elara accepted the crystal. As her fingers touched it, it activated, projecting a small hologram of a memorial that had been erected in the central plaza of the Varidian capital, a human child and a Varidian child, hands clasped in a universal gesture of friendship. Beneath it, inscribed in both human and Varidian script, "In memory of Mai Chen, May her legacy be understanding. Tears welled in Elara's eyes. Thank you, she said simply. Krell inclined his head once more and withdrew, leaving Elara to her thoughts. 1 year after the ratification ceremony, Commander Jackson Reed stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiant, staring out at the stars. The ship had been reassigned from military operations to exploration, part of humanity's new focus on expanding knowledge rather than territory. Penny for your thoughts, Commander, said Admiral Voss, joining him at the viewport. Reed smiled slightly, just reflecting on how quickly things change. A year ago, we were preparing for war. Now we're mapping stellar phenomena and making first contact with newly discovered species. Disappointed? Voss asked, a hint of amusement in her tone. Not at all, Reed replied honestly. I enlisted to protect Earth, not to fight wars. If diplomacy backed by the occasional show of force accomplishes that goal, I'm all for it. The Admiral nodded, turning to look out at the stars herself. The Mai-Chen protocols have been implemented in 17 disputes already. The Concord reports an 80% reduction in interspecies violence where the protocols have been applied. Mai would have liked that, Reed said softly. From what Ambassador Chen has told me, she was always trying to make friends with everyone she met. Even on the Varidian homeworld, she was fascinated by their culture, their architecture, their children. Voss was quiet for a moment. Do you think we did the right thing? Operation Nemesis, I mean. We could have pushed further, dismantled the Empire entirely. Reed considered the question carefully. I think we did what humans do best. We adapted. We showed enough force to make our point, enough restraint to avoid becoming what we opposed, and enough innovation to change the game entirely. He smiled. And now the galaxy has to adapt to us. Commander, his executive officer called from the doorway. We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. They're redirecting us to the Proxima Centauri colony. Apparently, they've made contact with a previously unknown species at the edge of the system. Reed straightened, immediately alert. Hostile. Unknown, sir. Initial reports suggest they're pre-FTL, possibly responding to our radio transmissions from the colony. Reed and Voss exchanged glances. The first contact scenario was always delicate, especially with a less technologically advanced species. Set course for Proxima Centauri, Reed ordered, and contact Ambassador Chen's office. If we're making first contact with a new species, I want humanity's best diplomat on hand to ensure we get it right. As the Defiant altered course, Reed remained at the viewport for a moment longer, watching the stars shift. Humanity had claimed its place among those stars not just through force, but through a vision of justice that transcended species. Now they had the opportunity to build something lasting, a galactic community where the strong protected the vulnerable, where cultural differences were respected but did not excuse harm, and where a child's life, any child of any species, would never again be dismissed as inconsequential. They had come seeking justice for Mai-Chen. They had found a new purpose for humanity among the stars. On Earth, in a quiet memorial garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Elara Chen placed fresh flowers beside a small statue of a smiling girl. The inscription read simply, Mai-Chen, whose life changed the galaxy. We did it, little one, Elara whispered. Your name is known across the stars now, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of what we can become when we recognize the value in every life. She sat on a bench beside the memorial, watching the sun set over the ocean. Tomorrow, she would return to her diplomatic duties, working to implement the protocols that bore her daughter's name. There would be challenges and setbacks, resistance from species set in their ways and empires reluctant to change. But humanity had proven itself not just as a military power, but as a moral force. They had demonstrated that true strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to stand for justice while remaining true to one's principles. As darkness fell and the first stars became visible in the evening sky, Elara looked up and smiled. Somewhere out there, representatives of hundreds of species were learning about a human child named Mai. And through her story, they were learning about humanity itself. Not just what humans could do when provoked, but what they could build when inspired. Not just their capacity for righteous anger, but their vision of a more just galaxy for all sentient beings. It was, Elara thought, a worthy legacy for her daughter, and for humanity itself as they took their place among the stars.